You don't know the world you're living in.
Welcome to the future.
Welcome to the show. I am the Gadfly, sent by God to rouse you from your slumber. And although the majority of what we do here is Western philosophy, I think it would do us a great disservice to ignore the beneficial ideas that have developed in the East, many of which are not dissimilar to Western ideas. Human civilization has a funny way of producing very similar ideas in very different locations and cultures. This video is titled Lessons from a Samurai, because all of these ideas that I'm going to offer as advice to the listener were used by the samurai, and I have learned them along my own martial arts journey. However, this does not mean that these ideas originated in samurai culture. Some are more ancient, and I understand that the samurai were not perfectly wholesome group, but they undoubtedly embodied several virtues worth maintaining, like courage, loyalty, and dedication, and they were immensely skilled at and committed to their work. With careful nuance and a judicious hand, we can navigate through samurai culture and take what works for us and discard the rest. Consider that right there a bonus tip from the Chinese martial art of Jeet Kune Do, with obvious similarities in ancient Greek eclectic philosophy. But with all that being said, let's get into it. One of the first things I learned when I began training martial arts was a concept called Mushin. My apologies if I butcher the pronunciation, I do not speak Japanese. But Mushin is a concept of empty-mindedness, not in a detached, lackadaisical, or aloof way, rather in a non-rigid, unbounded, and free type of way. The basic argument is that whenever we have an expectation or a rigid plan set in place, we try to execute that plan and achieve those goals, often by excluding and disregarding alternatives. Having goals can be a good thing, but having specific, close-minded, restraining goals can hinder our movement and our ability to dynamically interact with the world and respond to the problems presented within it. In martial arts, this is often used to teach students that they should not be chasing one simple technique against their opponent, because you become predictable, you become limited in your attacks, you cut off your paths to victory by refusing to take any other, and you become an obstacle in your own journey. Instead, the martial artist whose mind is in a state of Mushin has a broad goal of winning, but he doesn't decide by which technique or at which moment. He allows the opponent to present that to him, and he will take what is given, using it to his benefit. For example, a boxer shouldn't care if he wins the fight by a body shot TKO or a headshot knockout. He shouldn't chase either. Instead, he should be open to both and ready to seize upon either when his opponent makes an inevitable mistake. Mushin works in martial arts when the practitioner has practiced his techniques to the point that they become muscle memory, and he doesn't need to think about the appropriate way to respond to his opponent's mistake. His body responds before his mind ever decides to. The same should be true of our daily lives. We should train ourselves so that when we are faced with the scenario that angers us or upsets us, instead of lashing out, we respond reasonably and effectively without ever having to deliberate. This harkens back to the ancient Greek and Roman idea of virtue being a habit. If we train ourselves to do the right thing and think the right way, then any opponent we face will be met with our most effective and well-timed response. And this idea of an open, flowing, unrestrained mind leads me to the next idea that the samurai often used in their training, which they themselves derived from Zen Buddhism, known as Shoshin, or the mind of a beginner. This idea suggests that when we study or practice or consider something, we ought to have a mind that is open to all possibilities and ignores previous assumptions and notions of what we think we are being taught. Instead of thinking of ourselves as knowledgeable on any topic, we ought to be open to the possibility of learning something new and seeing something from a different perspective, just as a beginner would. And in my own study of martial arts, that has been the case as well. Many of the black belts I've studied with have said that although white belts might have mistaken ideas about how techniques work, sometimes the lowliest white belt can provide insight to something that the black belt who has studied for years has himself never considered. If this sounds familiar, it should. Jesus Christ said it when he said that we ought to be like children in our faith. Socrates echoed it when he said that philosophy begins in wonder. Bruce Lee said the same when he said, "A wise man can learn more from a foolish question than a fool can learn from a wise answer." It is a very simple idea that when you begin to learn about something, you should be like a sponge and absorb everything your teacher shows you without rejecting information based on how it does not sit well with what you already believe. Instead of throwing out new information because you don't understand it or don't like the way it contradicts your previously held beliefs, we should learn it, integrate it into our systems of belief, and then at that point start to look at what doesn't fit and make cuts. However, not only should we have this mindset when we begin to learn, but we should maintain this mind, and probably intensify it, when we gain knowledge on any subject. The more we become educated, the less likely we are to learn, or worse yet, the less likely we are to think that there even is anything to learn. We avoid this by maintaining our mind of Shoshin as the samurai had. Finally, one of the most influential ideas derived from this culture of martial arts in my own life has been the emphasis on yielding. This is not surrendering. It is not quitting. It is simply knowing when to resist and when to yield. It makes no sense to fight strength versus strength against a stronger opponent. In judo, for example, resisting a more powerful opponent will result in your defeat, while adjusting to and evading your opponent's attack will cause him to lose his balance. His power will be reduced, and you will defeat him. There's also the idea in judo that when your opponent pushes, you pull, and when your opponent pulls, you push. This is the basic idea that when a strong and overpowering force is moving in one direction, it's better to redirect and reroute that force off of its path rather than to meet it head on and try to fully stop it. It's easier to pull a lever and redirect a train than it is to stand on the tracks and try to stop the train with sheer force. Samurai imagery gives us the same analogy with a river. Much easier to redirect with a dam than it is to make the river flow backwards. So what does this offer us for our daily lives? When we face a problem, maybe the best option is not to resist it head on, but rather use its momentum or energy to our benefit. We already see this in people who get angry and go to the gym. Rather than doing something destructive with their anger, they channel that into motivation for exercise. We also see it in people who have lost loved ones and use that as motivation to continue on some legacy. It's much easier to use the memory of our loved one to live a worthwhile life than it is to resurrect our loved one. We should understand when we are outmatched and overpowered, and instead of trying to fight fire with fire, the wise choice is to fight fire with water. Yielding is not giving up, and it's not being weak. It's being smart, it's being resourceful, and it's being effective. And the best thing philosophy can do for us is to effectively solve our problems. All in all, the samurai were great problem solvers. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to stay notified, like the video, and comment in the comment section below.
They were meant to see, neither that or everyone else's.